I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learn to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. 1, a sense of duty. 2, it is a pleasure. 3, because in so doing I'm paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. Now let's look at page 100. On page 100 is the only sentence in the big book which goes directly to the question of sponsorship. Remember that the word sponsor or sponsorship is not used in the big book. They did not have sponsors when this book was written. The word had not been coined yet. It did not occur in AA literature until 1947. In that year, in an article written for the Grapevine, Bill mentioned that some of the groups were appointing sponsors to help newcomers through their first few weeks or first few months. That's the first time in the literature we find that word sponsor. But on page 100, the first sentence in the first paragraph, first full paragraph, boy, we have to take this to heart. Both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. You see what we're really looking at here with sponsorship? 2 human beings progressing spiritually together. So now that brings it back to this requirement that we, as sponsors, in the vernacular around here, walk like we talk, that we demonstrate in our affairs those things which we are teaching our sponsees to do. It is not enough to say, don't do as I do, do as I say. That may work very well in the military, but it does not work at all in AA. And so we're part of what we're doing here is conditioning ourselves to the idea that we're going to follow the 12th step implicitly and explicitly. When the 12th step says that we practice these principles in all our affairs, it means precisely what it says. And we're not going to allow ourselves to take a great deal of comfort from the idea that we are not saints, that we are not perfect, and so on and so on. Now that leads us to another one of the myths that are floating around here all the time, given great credence by having been repeated so often, and having been promulgated by our sainted Bill Wilson in the 12 and 12 at a time when he was almost out of his mind with depression and suicide and LSD. When it was still legal. Also, he was trying to become sainted by joining the Catholic Church, but they wouldn't have him. And he wrote a number of things which were dead wrong. One of the most glaring things he wrote that's dead wrong is that the only step we can work perfectly is the first step. How many have ever heard that around the rooms? Put your hands up. I hope you disregard it totally the next time you hear it. Let's just think about it logically for a second. The second step. What is the second step? A belief, isn't it? Now you tell me how it is that you can come to believe only partially. Isn't it true you either believe that God can restore you to sanity or you don't? Is that true or not? How can it be anything other than a belief or a non-belief? If we believe, we've worked the second step. How about the third step? The third step is a decision. We just read it a few minutes ago. Therefore, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. we decided in effect to quit playing God because it didn't work. Now, how do you only partly decide? Is it that we're trying to insinuate there that we don't work the third step perfectly because we don't decide to let God be the Father in all things, only in some things? But if we do that, have we worked the third step? No. Look at the third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee, to do with me and to build with me as Thou wilt. Is that offer conditional in any sense? No, as a matter of fact, we get down a little bit further in the text under the third step prayer. It tells us precisely the opposite, that this prayer is offered without condition, without reservations of any kind, doesn't it? Now you tell me how it's possible to follow the big book and follow the directions and not work the third step in quotes perfectly. Take a look at, for example, the sixth step. The sixth step, if you read the 12 and 12, is one of those if, as, when, come, and maybe things that is so comparative, and it's nothing but psychobabble if you look at what you read in the 12 and 12, but read the big book. We came, we were entirely ready, the word entirely is in there, to have God remove all these defects of character. Now, if we are not entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, we haven't worked the sixth step. How can it be otherwise? Look at the seventh step. We ask God to take away all of our defects that stand in the way of our usefulness to Him and our fellows. How can it be anything other than perfect? Because if we are not willing that happen, what do? The step tells us we pray for the willingness till it comes. Then the eighth step, ready to make amends to them all. How can we be anything less than perfect there? And if we're not willing to make amends to them all, what do? We pray for the willingness until it comes. Get to the 10th step. The 10th step probably has some wiggle room in it. Probably we need to be careful about that, because it tells us that we're to watch for our resentments and dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. Maybe we miss that once in a while. Maybe we're a little bit blinded here and there, but if we're trying desperately to be fully self-aware, we should pick up most of the stuff. But there's nothing imperfect that can be about turning these over to God, asking God to remove these things when they come up. There's nothing imperfect can be about discussing them with another, or making amends quickly if we've harmed someone. There's a lot of room for discussion in the 11th step, granted. People pray differently, people meditate differently. The inventory is clear as to what we're to do. But the step does not require us to use a specific prayer or type of prayer. It does not require of us that we meditate in a certain way. It does not require of us that we exactly what we're to write down and how we're to go about putting our inventory. We're asked the questions. We have to answer them. That's true. But we can work it perfectly by answering those questions, those 10 questions every night. In the morning, asking God to be with us during the day. In the morning, praying and meditating. And through the day, praying. We can do that. It's just the action we're talking about here, not the technique. So I suppose you could say that there is some reason to doubt the perfection of the 11th step. But to say that the only step we can work perfectly is the first step is pure balderdash. And the moment we accept that as being true, it means we have free license to take out the rest of the steps and butcher them. And that's what people are doing these days. Because they're applying human solutions and psychobabble and all of this stuff that comes from other 12-step fellowships, and they're bringing them into AA, and taking the big book and just in effect saying, no, no, no. We don't have to follow this. After all, this was written by a bunch of old white guys sitting back there. Most of them were waspy guys. What do they know about modern day stuff? And now we've had 67 years of progress, and so we're going to take all that progress and we're going to put it all together in a whole new stew, and we're going to come out of it with all this new stuff. You only have to work one step a year. Only work one step a month. It doesn't matter how you work steps as long as you work them on and on and on and on and on. And we take the directions in here and we scrap heap them. We have to remember something. You're going to be a sponsor. Think about this. Millions of people have recovered using and following the directions in this book. Are you willing to take a chance with your life and the life of somebody else by trying to come up with some cockamamie thing that somebody's invented, saying this is the modern way to do it, when you know that this works and not one word's ever been changed, because it does work. Not only does it work for alcoholics, it works for addicts, it works for fatties, it works for people with emotional problems, and with people with sex problems, and people who bite their nails, and people who pick lint out of their navel. I mean, it works. Whatever the problem is, it works. And if it didn't, promise you, we wouldn't be here. If these 12 steps did not work, we wouldn't be here. That's why we are here, because they do work. Now listen to this, because this is important to understand. The 12 steps are spiritual principles which mankind has always known about. The problem is that they had never before been restated as steps of action. You can go to the Bible, go to the book of James, you'll find them all in there. But people have been told how you are supposed to be, how you are supposed to live your life, how you are supposed to feel, how you're supposed to act, but never once told how to get there. See, that's the difference. We are expected to be certain ways when we go to church. We come in here, we're shown how to be them. In other words, these principles have been reduced and restated as steps of action, which means very simply this. If you and I and the people we sponsor will take these steps and incorporate them in their lives, live them as a way of life, they take all these great spiritual principles and incorporate them within themselves. It becomes the way they live their lives. And that's what you and I as sponsors must do. We take the 12 steps seriously. Practice these principles in all my affairs. And when I do that, I become a living, breathing example of the power of God working in the life of another human being, which means that we are demonstrating to the people we're sponsoring everything that we're trying to teach them about how to live their lives. And this is a wonderful thing. It makes working as a sponsor so much easier. And when you have somebody who is afraid of sobriety, sometimes you have to work them in kind of slowly. But the most important thing is that they see that you're living a sober life and a spiritual way of life, and you're happy, joyous, and free. And why should that be? Well, here's something which we seldom hear discussed. But in chapter 9, the chapter of the family afterward, the big book says that we're sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. That means that it's God's will for us that we be happy, joyous, and free. That means that our heritage, each of us, as we sit here, is happiness, joyousness, and freedom. Remember, the big book says we absolutely insist upon enjoying life. That sobriety is not a vale of tears or a swamp of depression, quite the opposite. We have the heritage. Now, of those three, happiness, joyousness, and freedom, freedom is the greatest gift of all because it means freedom from the bondage of self. We get to have the joy of living. We get to be happy in our lives because we feel successful. Now, that's a kind of a tricky concept, but let's think about it for a second. If you want to be successful and you want to teach your sponsees how to taste success, you teach them the very, very simple way of living their lives. That is, each day you you're going to have your prayer and meditation to start the day. You're going to sit down and you're going to figure out what's on your plate to be done today, what's on the agenda. Then you're going to go out and you're going to do what's in front of you to be done today. Whatever's there, we're going to do it. You're not going to hurt another person. You're going to do the next right thing as it presents itself. And it's not so difficult as it may sound. Because the big book tells us that if we do as we believe God would have us and leave the results up to Him, we're going to be just fine. And of course that's the last thing. We always leave the results up to God. So we do what's in front of us to be done. We do the next right thing. We don't harm another person, and we leave the results up to God. Now here's what happens. If we live our lives that way during the day, then tonight, when we review our day, we look back. And guess what? Even though the results were not what we had hoped, even though we did not get everything that we had anticipated getting, nevertheless, we will feel successful. Because success will not be measured in results, but in effort. Did I do the right thing today? And when I look back on my day, regardless of the result, I will feel successful. I have successfully completed my day. And if you feel successful, I promise you, you will have happiness. I've never yet met a person who felt successful who was unhappy. And I've never yet met a person who felt like a failure, who was anything but sad. When you look at your unhappiness and your sadness, look back to see what you consider to have been your failures rather than your successes. And so we teach a very, very simple way of living our lives. Do what's in front of you to be done. Do what's on your plate. Don't shirk, don't put off, don't procrastinate. Just do it. Do the next right thing as it presents itself. Don't hurt another person. And leave the results up to God. That's all we have to do. Now, when we do that, look what's happening. We're living in today. Everybody talks about that, but really can't tell you how you do it. We're living in today. We're not regretfully looking at the past, nor wishfully daydreaming about the future. When we meditated this morning, we got with God because He's always in the now. So we stay in the now, we stay in today, we leave the results up to Him. And as Dr. Paul said in his story in the back of the book, I never sit while waiting for God to show me what to do. Rather, I do what's in front of me to be done, and I leave the results up to Him. However that turns out, that's God's will for me. Makes sense, doesn't it? And it makes it so bloody simple. You know, we go around here, and if you listen to stuff in these rooms, you're going to get the most skewed idea of how complicated life really is supposed to be, living it as a recovering alcoholic. It's not. It is not. It's simple. The moment we get the idea and we go back to basics, just as we read in Bill's story, what did he say? Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. He said, I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Now, as a sponsor, it's really, really important to understand that that does not mean except in those things that your sponsor deems to be important, except in those things where some mythology will interfere. For example, I'm going to tell you on the one hand to turn in all things to the Father of light. I'm going to tell you that regardless of what's going on in your life, you must allow God to be in charge. I'm going to tell you that the results must be left to Him. But on the other hand, I'm going to tell you, don't have a relationship for a year. Now, how can we reconcile those two things? I'm going to tell you, don't make an important decision for a year. How can we reconcile that? If I'm going to say to you, Sponsy, you follow God in all things. You turn to Him. For example, we tell people don't have a relationship for a year, which is total nonsense. A year has nothing whatsoever to do with anything. Nothing. Nothing. But then we see just how inconsistent we have been. The moment we turn to page 69, it tells us in a situation like this, what do? In our morning meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific thing. And the right answer will come if we want it. Now that's being consistent. What business do we have meddling in somebody else's love life anyway? I can't figure that one out unless somehow or another we're getting a kick out of it. If I'm going to tell you, you're my sponsee and you must be celibate and monastic until I tell you otherwise, what have I done except that I have established my power over you? Not only have I established my power over you, but by making you obey me in this, under the threat of being fired, I've created a dependency, haven't I? And not only that, but I can go around now, and I'm keeping a little list down here that I don't make public very often, which I'll give little marks here that show that every time I'm able to make somebody do what I want them to do, boy, there's another mark, there's another mark. And then I have another list over here. Those who are dependent upon Jim. Ha ha! Man, does that make me feel good. Because I haven't got a life of my own. See, so many people stay sober on the ego of sponsorship. And the only way that they can feed their ego is by making their sponsees dependent upon them and ordering them around and making sure that they have controlled their lives. How in the world can we say on the one hand that dependency upon other than dependency upon God is a sure way to disaster, and at the same time make it our business to make our sponsee dependent upon us? Yes, Bob?
Could I say that any form of control is a civil form of abuse?
Well, yeah, control. I mean, how in the world can you justify, or how in the world can you talk about controlling somebody at the same time tell them that they can't allow anybody to control them? Isn't that what we tell them? What does it say here? What does it say here? Ah, yes, page 98. The first full paragraph, almost dead in the middle of the page. 9-8. Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth. Job or no job, wife or no wife, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people, and that should say including sponsors, ahead of dependence on God. Burn the idea in the conscience of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is he trusts in God and clean house. I don't know how much more clear can it be? And yet people fall into the trap as sponsors of, I guess there's a great big need that's being fulfilled, a hole that has to be filled in their own psyche, to have others dependent upon them and following their directions and following around. You call me every day or I'll fire you, and that kind of stuff. You know. I'll tell you when you're ready to work the steps. You're not ready. You've got 5 years before you get all the cobwebs out. Of course, we do know that the longest term of sobriety in the fellowship when the big book was written was 3 years, and many people who helped write the book who didn't have 6 months sobriety yet, and by the time they were 6 months sober, they were already 12-step veterans. But we're going to disregard all that, because I can keep you around dangling on my strings for 5 years before your brain clears up enough that you'll be even able to understand what the big book says. In the meantime, just don't drink and go to meetings. And if you feel like drinking, you call me. If you don't feel like drinking, call me. We got to have breakfast every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. And then you sit there and, by the way, remember that you're only as sick as your secrets. I want to know every single thing that happens in your life. The moment you don't tell me, remember, you either open your mouth or you open a bottle. I mean, this stuff goes on and on and on and on, when the only answer that you and I can legitimately bring to anybody is in this book, and it's called 12 Steps. Now then, let's assume with our new person, we're leading them toward their first step. We have gone through the process of showing them how we drank and establishing credibility with them. We've helped them to begin the process of breaking down the wall of denial. We've helped them bring them some hope. We've informed them about their disease, and we've talked about how we've recovered. We stressed the spiritual freely. Now at this point, we need to determine whether they are interested and want to go further. And so let's take a look right now at page 95 in your big book. This is in the 7th chapter, and we're now taking a look at some part of the instructions for working with newcomer. Top of page 95. Unless your friend wants to talk further about himself, do not wear out your welcome. Give him a chance to think it over. If you do stay, let him steer the conversation any direction he likes. Sometimes a new man is anxious to proceed at once, and you may be tempted to let him do so. This is important now. This is sometimes a mistake, and I would editorially comment that it's almost always a mistake. If he has trouble later, he's likely to say you rushed him. You'll be the most successful with alcoholics if you do not exhibit any passion for crusade or reform, just what we were discussing before the break. Never talk down to an alcoholic from any moral or spiritual hilltop. Simply lay out the kit of spiritual tools for his inspection. Does everybody know what that simple kit of spiritual tools consists of? It's not defined in the big book, is it? We have simply the reference. There are two references, this one and the one in chapter 2. That simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. But we can identify those tools simply by reference to the steps. The first of the tools is inventory, the 4th step. The second of those tools is admission, which is the 5th step. Third of those tools is submission to God of our defects and our insanities, which is the 7th step. The 4th of those tools is making amends, the 9th step. And then in the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps, we have prayer, meditation, and working with others. So we can identify those 7 tools, the simple kit of spiritual tools: inventory, admission, submission, amends, prayer, meditation, and working with others. And so here we're talking on page 95 again. Simply lay out the kit of spiritual tools for his inspection. Now you see, that tells you, if you're following the directions of the Big Book, tells you what you need to do with this new person to help them move along toward their first step. You've showed them enough that they have begun to understand at least the outlines of the program of action, which we call the 12 steps. Offer him friendship and fellowship. And so therefore, one of the things we're going to do here is we're going to tell them about AA and what AA is. We'll tell them about how the fellowship works, just a little bit. This doesn't have to be some kind of a long dissertation, but enough to let this person know that if they wish to recover and join us, that they will be joining a society which cares about its members, which offers fellowship, which offers the comfort of a group and the power of a group. So we're going to offer him friendship and fellowship. Tell him that if he wants to get well, you will do anything to help. Notice the word well, the phrase to get well. Now, people are always going to want to argue with you about this is an incurable disease. What the heck do you mean getting well? The Big Book defines it quite simply, that we do recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and we are relieved of the symptoms of the disease. And that relief can be a process of remission which goes on for the rest of our lives, provided, of course, that we continue to stay fit spiritually. If he's not interested in your solution, if he expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties or a nurse for his sprees, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. Just he may do after he gets hurt some more. That's not up to us, is it? Not up to us. You see, one of the things that is real important to remember and to keep in mind is that when someone comes in that door out there, they're coming in that door to the grace of God. It's the second great miracle of their lives, the first one when they were born. They may not recognize it, probably won't, but we need to know it, because that gives us an entirely different outlook upon the responsibility that God has given with us, which is to work with them. If we don't look at them as some bum who just wandered in here looking for a cup of coffee and a place to mooch a cigarette, if we start thinking of them instead as people who are coming here because it is God's will that they get sober, and it's our job to help them do that, then it changes our entire attitude toward them. If you have watched some bummy guy come in who left the shopping cart out there and he's straggly and he stinks, see how many of our wonderful brethren will go up to him and give him a hug and talk to him. If that doesn't work too well, then the next person at the door should be a 24-year-old nymphette. And you'll see a whole cloud of people surrounding her. And I don't know if there's any way to avoid this, but I'm hoping that at least with us, as we study these things, we will come to understand that this is not a matter of some kind of onerous duty which is foisted off on us by our sponsors or by some kind of rules and regulations or anything. No, we're here because God wants us here, and He evidently expects us to follow some directions and do as He directs us to do. Among the most important things we ever do is to carry His message. Let's go to the next paragraph here on page 95. Now this is the same, this is your first contact with this new person. If he's sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read, this book. in the interval. Now, that means two things, doesn't it? First of all, it means this book means the whole book. And another thing it means is it doesn't mean anything about living sober or AA comes of age or 12 steps and 12 traditions. There's this book. Why? There's got to be a reason for this. This book was written for the new person. This book was written for the new person who was out there twisting slowly in the wind out in the boondocks where there are no other acknowledged alcoholics around. No AA meetings, just out there all by their lonesome. This book was written to go to Cucamonga, to go to Pierre, South Dakota, to go to Baton Rouge, and even to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which was at that time pretty much of a wild place, almost undiscovered. And the person who picks up this book at that time is supposed to be able to pick it up and read it and begin to have two things happen. One, that the walls of denial be broken down and that hope come into that person's heart. And then to start following the directions in here. And then we have a whole chapter 9, which teaches the new person who has gotten a little bit sober doing this how to go out and bring others into the ambit. Teaches them how to set up their own group. Most people don't even recognize that the chapter 11 is there for that purpose. That's why it's there. It's a whole process that's being developed here through the grace of God, because this book is an inspired document. And so when we think in terms of wanting to help somebody with their first step, we must understand that the book, the entire book, including all the stories in the back of the book, were written for them to read, to break down their denial and to bring them hope. And if we refuse or fail or listen to the mythology that floats around these rooms, we won't do that, because we will think that it's perfectly permissible for us to pick and choose what they ought to read, or if our sponsors didn't have us read the whole book but gave us a Reader's Digest expurgated version of it, that's perfectly fine. The big book as your sponsor sees it, in other words. Just read the first 3 chapters. Well, what in the hell good does that do? It gets a start. If you want to read Bill's story, maybe that's going to be enough if you identify completely with Bill. And so you say, well, if Bill was a drunk, so am I. And if you see that he got sober and you say, well, he got sober, I guess I can too. But how often are we going to find that happen? So we read the whole book. Now then, by the way, if you have any doubt about that, look on page 112, please. The first 3 words on 112, top of the page. Oh, okay. Just remember 112, that's the direction. Read this book. Okay. Now we were talking a little bit during the break, one of my friends and I, she brought up the question of the person that you're working with. This is a very pertinent question. The person you're working with, and you've told them a story and you've given them a lot of your time, and they still are balking and digging in their heels. They're pretty much telling you that they're not interested. What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to keep insisting and trying to get them to understand or to agree? No. Let's look and see what this says. Read this book in the interval. We're on page 95 still. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. Here is the rule. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. Now we'll turn over to the next page, page 96. Remember, we're still on the path here of trying to help the new person toward their first step, toward that learning process which will help them to learn that they must fully concede to their innermost selves that they are alcoholic, and they must acknowledge and accept as an absolute fact that they can never safely drink alcohol again. The obsession that they're like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. Go to the second paragraph on page 96. Now, this paragraph gives the absolute lie to those who say that we're supposed to just screw around with newcomers, let them come to meetings and prove to me that you really want this, and after you've done that for 90 days, then maybe we'll talk about the steps. In the meantime, call me every day or I'll fire you. I'll tell you when you're ready to work the steps. You're not ready yet. When you come to meetings, you put the cotton in your mouth and take it out of your ears. You keep your head down, your mouth closed. You don't have anything to say that anybody wants to hear. And besides which, you got to fake it till you make it. But just don't drink and go to meetings. And on and on and on and on and on and on, to such a sickening degree that sometimes it's unbearable to sit around and listen to it. Here's the way that we have to think, guys. If you want to follow the big book, if you wish to be a sponsor who can be effective by carrying God's message, the answers are in the book. And if somebody tells you to do something or you hear something you're not sure about, you ask them or ask yourself, gee, where's that in the book? And where's God in that equation? It's not in the book. God isn't there. Forget about it. That's not the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's Human Solutions. And there's all kinds of that stuff floating around out there. And every treatment center practices it on a daily basis. Many AA groups, or Problems Anonymous groups, practice it on a daily basis. It's not in the book, and God's not in the equation. You safely ignore it. Now, some of this stuff might be pretty good advice, but damn it, we're not in the process here of giving advice. We're here to teach people how to use these spiritual tools to save their behinds and to put them on a spiritual path where they too can fulfill their mission, which is to be a maximum service to God and the people about them. This is not some kind of a childish game we're playing. Got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with putting notches in your belt or being able to run around and brag how many people you sponsor. Got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with setting people up so that they become totally dependent upon you as their sponsor. Making them dependent to fulfill your own ego. People stay sober around here on the sponsor of egoship. Ego of sponsorship all the time. The sponsor of egoship. That's pretty good. The ego of sponsorship keeps a lot of people sober for a long time. But eventually it's not enough. Eventually it's bye-bye, Charlie or Charlene. See you later. Now then, page 96. Let's see what's happened here. Suppose you're making your, what's this, second visit to a man? This is only the second time we've gotten together? He's read this volume. Oh, I see why we're doing it now. He's actually done his work. By the way, if you want to find out if somebody's really serious or just kicking tires, give them the book and ask them to read it. You'll soon find out who wants this and who doesn't. He's read this volume and says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. That's reminiscent of what? In chapter 5. If you have decided you want what we have, and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready, what? Take certain steps. Thank you, Pete. And the word is then, it's not next year. And then means right then, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. So let's just make sure we got that clear. So he's ready now, and it doesn't say he's prepared after a year of fooling around with this stuff, but he's prepared right now to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story. but do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else. We're not saying to him, well, you don't want me to do it, well, screw you, you know, it's tough, you're out of luck, you can sit around here for 6 months. No, let's find somebody that you do relate to. Let's find somebody who's ready and willing and able, and you're willing and able to learn the steps from. Let's get it on, let's get it done. When I came in, it's almost 38 years ago, so it's old time, covered wagon, just cut through, making it through Donner Pass, right? The saying then was simply this: we have to do 9 steps in 90 days or less. And there was another rule too. How many meetings do I have to go to, we used to ask. Oh, they say the rule is simple, it's 15 and 30. Oh, that's easy. 15 meetings in 30 days? No, 15,000 meetings in 30 years. And after that, if you still feel as though you don't want to go to meetings anymore, you probably can back away, but by that time you won't want to. So, now we have the newcomer right up to the point of working the steps, and now we've got them ripe to go forward. Now then, the first step, as we've discussed, is not something which can be forced upon anybody. If he's to get sober, the desire must come from within. He's going to have to learn to concede to his innermost self, or her own innermost self, that he or she is an alcoholic, and must also come to accept as a fact that the delusion that they're like other people, or presently may be, is wrong, that there is no way that they can ever drink safely again, that the rule here is abstinence, total abstinence for the rest of our lives. This is a very scary prospect, and you need to know, guys, as sponsors, that many times a new person you're trying to work with is going to be scared silly of recovery. They're going to be scared silly of not having alcohol in their lives anymore. They're going to truly believe that it may be impossible for them to survive without it. Not only are they going to be afraid of recovery from that standpoint, but they're going to be afraid of recovery because now they will have no way to escape from the vicissitudes of life, no way to escape from their commitments, no way to escape from their responsibilities, no outs whatsoever. And you've taken away the one thing they had that they thought was an out, that they're just sick people, and you've explained carefully to them that is no bloody excuse for anything. That they've been making decisions based on self all this time, which put them in a position to be harmed. And so recognize that there may be substantial fear in terms of this whole idea of abstinence, total abstinence. The plug is in the jug. Nevertheless, we're going to press forward. If we've got somebody who truly wishes to recover and to find God, we're going to be showing them that there are 3 things now that they must do. And then we'll show them the 4th in just a moment. But the 3 things that they must do right now. They've read the book, let's keep reading it. Every word they read in there leads them closer to the truth, closer to an understanding. Get to a meeting, at least one meeting every day. At least one meeting every day. Get into the habit. Explain to them that when they have made a decision and a commitment to go to a meeting today, especially when they're new, that this is a commitment to sobriety. It is more than a commitment to go to a stupid meeting. It's a commitment to sobriety. So get to a meeting every day. They must learn to talk to people in sobriety, people with good sobriety, people who have been there before them. And talk before the meetings, talk after meetings, grab an opportunity to go out for coffee afterwards. Find somebody who's, if you've heard them you've heard them share and you like what you heard, ask them to sit and talk with you for a little while. Find out what they've done. Mainly have this contact, this human contact with people who have recovered. And those three things they must do. But there's one more thing. And this is the one that you may feel like balking at because perhaps it isn't what you were taught. You got to start praying. You got to start praying. This is perhaps the most important thing you'll ever teach them. Now then, you say, well, what about the agnostic or the atheist? Aha. Yes, that's a problem. We're going to have to meet that problem sooner or later, aren't we? That problem's going to have to be met right down the road, just around the corner in the second step, isn't it? Why don't we meet it head on right now? Are we going to be able to convince them to give up their agnosticism or their atheism? Very doubtful. Are we going to be able to appeal to them on the basis of some sort of spiritual beliefs on our own, or even religious beliefs? Sometimes, but highly doubtful. Then how are we going to go about this? Well, we have to remember, because we're the ones who are further along in recovery, we've got to remember who has all power. Where does the power reside? It's not in us. So what do we want to do now? In order for this first step and this concession and all these gifts to be given, it's going to require the power of a higher power. We can't do it ourselves, and your sponsee can't do it himself or herself. Right here in the first step, we must recognize that we're going to be looking at a great gift which will come. Not one that not something can be forced, not something that we can talk anybody into. Oh, you can make them admit all kinds of stuff because they want to please you. But please don't think that you've all of a sudden become God and you're able to do that, because you aren't, and I'm not. But what we do is we lead them in the path which will lead to the first step. They've reached this point where they're now willing. They've expressed the willingness to work the steps. They desire to find God in their lives, or find a higher power, or at the very least they're driven with a powerful desire for sobriety and a new way of life. All we have to remember when we reach this point is what Bill said. And this is easy, and it's the truth. He said, I learned that I had to pray just as if there were a God. And then when the miracles began to come, and I could no longer deny that they came from a power greater than myself, that's when faith came.
Fake it till you make it.
Pray till you make it.
Yeah.
Pray till you make it. And you may find it expeditious, by the way, to write out a little prayer form. We don't care at this juncture what the prayer is. A lot of people like to use a little prayer saying, please keep me from drinking today, and then at night, thank you for keeping me from drinking. Maybe we want a little bit more than that, if we can arrange it. Now, not everybody you're going to sponsor is going to have this hang-up. Not everybody's going to be jammed up about God. There's going to be plenty of them who are, not because there's any true agnosticism or atheism, no. Because there's great fear, and there's great sense of shame and remorse and guilt, because so many things have been done during their drinking and drugging careers which they feel so ashamed and guilty about. And perhaps they've been taught that these things lead inevitably to some kind of horrible punishment. And so what they're trying to do is just simply shove God in the background, not have anything to do with God, because they're so afraid of what may happen. And that's so often the case with people who are denying any real belief in God or willingness to turn to Him because they're just afraid. Write out a prayer form. God, please make me willing to believe that you just might exist. That's a great prayer. And we see then, when we do that, we see the tie-in with the second step, don't we? Remember that the only thing that's required is that there be a willingness to believe. Let's look where we found that out in the first instance, right back in Bill's story. And Abby taught this to Bill, and we need to follow this through because what Abby was doing with Bill teaches us a lot of lessons about how we work with our people. Let's go over to page 8. I'm sorry, page 10. Page 10. We're going to follow a little bit along here and see how Bill came about with his first step. Bottom of page 9, last sentence. Now identify yourself with Abby here, please. This is you now. He, meaning Abby, had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. You see now how hopelessness comes in here. And the first edition talks about this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And then Bill talks about the difficulty he's always had with God and the idea of a God personal to him. Down to bottom page 11 now. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Down the second little paragraph there near the middle of page 12, my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Now take this to heart, guys, because this is the way we do it. It's just as valid today as it was the day Abby used it back then 37, 38 years ago. You've got somebody who is professing agnosticism in one form or another, or perhaps even atheism. We simply say to them, look, you don't have to accept any conception of God just because I do or because the fellowship does, because the fellowship doesn't have any God of AA. We have God, and most of us call our higher power that. But you get to choose your own conception of God. And now then go down one paragraph below that. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make a beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I would build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Now Bill is evidencing right here his own willingness to believe. However, if we have somebody we're working with toward their first step and they're still balking at this, we ask them to pray to God, asking God to give them the willingness to believe. And the prayer could be something like this. God, if you're there, if you exist, please make me willing to believe in you. Please make me willing to believe that there is power such as you out there, power greater than myself, who cares about me and loves me and wants only the best for me. And we teach them to do this. Now what will happen, and this is invariable, it always happens. They open the door just a tiny crack and God comes flooding in. The willingness will come. And this is a great lesson because there are 4 more times in working the steps where willingness becomes essential. And we pray for the willingness until it comes. For example, in the 6th step, forget about the 12 and 12. 12 and 12 out the window as far as 6th step is concerned. 6th step is an absolute. That we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. There's no wishy-washy stuff in there, no weasel words, no comparative stuff, no you can do it or not do it, all these defects of character. And what's the sole and single solution in the event we are not entirely ready? Pray for the willingness till it comes. Go down the page to the 8 steps, same thing. We're not ready to make all of our amends. Pray for the willingness until it comes. See, we've already learned that this works. And so, and all the way through, wherever our actions require the willingness to take the action, wherever we're required to take action and we need willingness to do it, we simply pray for the willingness. I'll tell you something. Here's the rule. Whenever we pray for anything which will help us grow spiritually, that prayer is always answered. Counts on it. It's when we pray for new girlfriends, new boyfriends, new cars, a boat, house on the bay, lots of money, that new job we want, any of that stuff. We might have to wait a little while. We might even have to be disappointed. And any time we pray for something like, patience, that's a very dangerous one to pray for, because quite often we are tested severely. Now, I have a favorite prayer which I like to use, and this follows after someone has been particularly nasty to me, and I bow my head in prayer, and they always ask me, "What are you doing?" And I say to them, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord," and I'm praying for the patience to wait around long enough to see what He's going to do to you. All right. Therefore, the first step, read the book. Go to meetings every day. Talk to people in recovery and pray. And when we do that, we are given the first step as a gift. It will come. Count on it. We will learn that we must fully concede to our innermost selves that we are alcoholic, and that the delusion that we are like other people or presently may be will be smashed. We will take our first step without reservations, and at that point we're ready to move on to our second step.